Hey everyone, today we're talking with Kamy Akhavan. Kamy is the executive director at USC for the Center for the Political Future. He's the former CEO at procon.org, and he's an expert on political polarization. We're super lucky to be talking with him today, and I hope you enjoy it. How you doing?
I'm good, and it's Monday, and a little bit of back to work today.
Yeah.
Last week was my kids' spring break, so we had a theme for every day of the week. So today, no themes. It's not camping day. It's not retro day. It's not animal day.
That's ambitious. We did the camping thing in the living room. That was adventure. That was actually a lot of fun. We just try to keep it fresh as well, but the theme thing, I don't think I can keep up with it.
It was a good way to not have to think about what to do because it was already determined by the theme.
Yeah, of course. No, that's smart. I'm going to take a page out of your book. So thank you for taking the time. It's really good to see you again. And I appreciate you taking time out to talk to us about how the pandemic is affecting politics, how it's affecting students, and all the little spider webs that crawl out from that. So for those of you who don't know, Kamy's the executive director at the Center for the Political Future at USC. He was also the former CEO at procon.org, and he's a professional speaker. So he's pretty much a Jedi master when it comes to all things about political polarization and nonpartisanship. So we're lucky to have him today, and I'm excited to dive in.
Thanks, Aaron. My pleasure.
So I kind of wanted to talk about, this pandemic is impacting everybody on different levels. What I'm really curious about is obviously, to start it off, is the 2020 presidential election. I'm immersed in this stuff all the time, as I know you are. And the pandemic gave me this sense of I think we have a much needed pause, but in politics, I feel like there was a complete pause, and I feel like people aren't paying attention. I hope that's not right. But what are you seeing right now as far as the impacts on this coming election?
Well, I think the way you experienced it is the way that a lot of us are. Pandemic seems very existential. You don't know if you can go to the grocery store to buy food or to order takeout, if you have to sanitize it before you eat it. We're all thinking about life and death kind of situations here. If we have elderly loved ones, we're thinking, maybe I'll get stuff for them so they don't have to leave the house. There's a lot of fear, a lot of concern. And politics had been a backseat for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But now when we've got a pandemic right in front of us, we can't go to our jobs, kids can't go to school. Politics is way in the backseat now for good reason. So the election has been on pause. It's been on pause because, one, the airwaves are completely dominated by news about coronavirus, and that makes sense. We need to know where we can go, where we cannot go, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, all these kinds of issues. So for people running for office right now, they can't hold rallies. They don't necessarily have a big enough digital audience to do digital rallies. So what do? They don't really campaign is the bottom line, and they try to get whatever media attention that they possibly can through their existing networks, Twitter, Facebook. Maybe they'll get an interview here or there, but for the most part, it's hard to get the spotlight now. So a lot of campaigns are very much on, I'll say, pause. There's some politicians who are doing those camera moments like, I'm going to deliver a box of gloves to this local hospital and have the local media come and watch me do it. Well, there's a little bit of that, but for the most part, it's definitely in the backseat. But that said, there is going to be an election happening in November, and what are we going to do? There's been some primaries that have been put on delay. There's some primaries that they've not had a delay and said, just vote if you can. Good luck. Go to the polls and hope you don't catch coronavirus.
Yeah.
There's been some of that. But the point is that the ship sails on, right? We're still going to have a general election in November. It's going to be most likely Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. and who we're going to vote for. And then what about all the House races and Senate races and local water district and governorships and et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of electioneering that's going to happen between now and then. So, you know, politicians often will advertise on television. A lot of people are watching TV these days because they're at home. So you'll see a lot more messages coming out that way. A lot of people are spending time online. You'll see a lot more digital advertising going towards campaigns, because if you can't earn the media through appearances, you can pay for the media. And there's debate about whether bought media is as valuable as earned media. Generally, it's not. Earned media is significantly better. But the point is that campaigns have changed a lot. Elections so far have changed a lot. We don't know what November is going to bring. We don't know if the virus is going to go away and come back, right?
Yeah.
We don't know. So it's a lot of this uncertainty at a time when politics was already not the number one interest means, of course, it's going to be number 12 on the list right now. But at the same time, it's hugely impactful, right? So what do we do? And here we are.
Yeah, and I feel like it's all tied to this. I mean, there's an economic fallout. There's obviously that the healthcare system has been, I think, just completely disrobed in front of everybody as far as like where our inefficiencies are and where some of our vulnerabilities are. You know, and then this also brings up just income disparities and just between, you know, the rich and poor and how people are affected by quarantine differently. You know, I think domestic violence is an issue about people being trapped in their houses now with abusers. So as this feels political in the sense that there's issues related to this that are vital. But going back to, I think, your point of like, you know, you can't really rally right now. You can't go out and knock doors. I feel like campaigns have to pivot in a way that they never have before. And this is just my personal belief, but I think Trump has taken the coronavirus updates as rallies in a way, because I think he approaches them in the same way. Bernie, you know, he just bowed out recently, but before had pivoted his whole campaign to be about this and raising money for this as opposed to fund my campaign. So I think he acted quickly and was effective financially on that. And, you know, and Biden did town halls. But so I could see some of those pivots starting to happen. But I also feel like it's, like you said, like they're silenced to a degree. And whether that means there's a resurgence of television over internet, or if, you know, internet ads, if they have to get creative and start like dancing on TikTok or something, like, I don't know what that looks like. My worry is that, to go back to another thing you said there was, you know, the primaries just felt so all over the place. I agree that we should delay the ones that were delayed because we're in a pandemic and it makes no sense. So Wisconsin was really a disappointment, in my opinion, of putting people's lives at risk where you could have easily dealt with that. But does that set up the administration and Trump's campaign to say, you know, if this does carry on longer, like maybe we need to push the general? Like, is that conspiracy, or does that feel more real at this point?
I'll say a few months ago, even this conversation seemed an impossibility, and here we are. So, you know, never say never. I remember being interviewed 5 years ago about Obamacare and saying it's too entrenched, it can never go away, and it's been slowly being dismantled. So I remember Bob Shrum and Mike Murphy, with whom I work with every day, said there is no way, not in this universe or a parallel universe, that Donald Trump will ever be elected president. And look what happened.
So remember that.
it doesn't seem likely that the general election will be delayed, but who knows? There's a possibility. And to prepare for that possibility, and quite honestly, there's been a lot of effort. So there's a lot of really incredible people and organizations in the United States. I mean, we live in a very dynamic entrepreneurial country, and we're very grateful for it, right? There's some organizations that are thinking, well, look, if you can't leave the house to vote, we all know that voting is very important. We believe in the democratic process. How can we increase participation at a time when you can't walk out the door? What about vote by mail efforts? So there's some people who are really strongly pushing that. There's people who are strongly pushing the vote by phone or vote by internet effort as well. And there's people who are lobbying to extend the voting period. So instead of just a day, what if it was a week? And what if instead of showing to one polling place, you could show up to any number of polling places, anyone in your state, and be able to vote from there? There's
That's
these
pretty much what California just did in the primary, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. So these kinds of efforts, maybe there will be, the polling places won't be as crowded that way. You vote from the comfort of your own home. There's some efforts in place to try to mitigate what could be a coronavirus general election in November. But there's also resistance to those efforts too, because the facts are the facts, that there's more registered Democrats in this country than there are registered Republicans. That's just true. Second to Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's declined to state or independent. People who won't say that what they are. It's none of your business. I'm going to vote how I want to vote. Then third are Republicans. So for the Republicans to do really well, they have to use different types of tactics. They have to get a bigger percentage of their side of the team to show up and vote. And they have to try to make sure that a lot of the other side doesn't show up to vote. That's just math. And that's how elections work. It seems cynical. It seems dirty. That's how it's been for a few hundred years. We've had this experiment in democracy.
That's what I want to ask you is how far back does that go? Because I do feel like, when this country was formed and, the original colonies and then how we expanded and became a union, and at what point, or was it always the fact that we were always kind of, this division was always there and it wasn't about getting the whole country to come out to vote no matter how you felt? Was there always that suppression?
Some form of it or another. You and I are both studied history, and we know very well the types of tests that were given to non-white voters to determine if they would be allowed to vote. And you read that test now, with a PhD, you could not pass that test. It's incredibly difficult, right, to have passed those tests. So there was that as one example. There was the running joke that Illinois used to be the state where they would stuff the ballot for the Democrats in the northern part of the state and then stuff it with ballots for the Republicans in the southern part of the state, and you'd end up as a wash, and it was a fair election. So there was that give and take. The era of the big bosses in politics has largely gone away, but the big bosses were big bosses because they could heavily influence the outcome of elections, paying people to show up to vote, on the sly paying them. This attempt to influence the vote has gone on as long as there have been votes, right? So that part is not new. What's really substantially changed, I'd say, over the last 30 or 40 years is what I would call a hyper-polarization. People have always disagreed about issues. There's no question about it. There's been fights on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives where someone was caned nearly to death, right? So these are famous battles. If you read some of the campaign literature from the era of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, you'll see them saying horrible things like, "My opponent eats babies." That's a real thing that was said, right? So it's always been vicious. What's different about it today is that you and I may have a difference of opinion, and because we are rational, nice people, we're not going to shun the other person because you think China trade policy should be different than I think how it should be. But for a lot of people in this country, it has become quite tribal, where if you don't see things the way I see them politically, then you're not on my team, you're not on my tribe, and you become not just someone I disagree with, but you become the enemy. And the enemy is not who you want to come over to your kid's birthday party. Enemy is not who you're going to invite to your barbecue. The enemy is the person that you're going to try to shut down, shut out, keep out of the process, make sure that they don't get hurt, that they don't get influenced. So that level of tribalism is new to our politics, relatively new. It's been getting worse and worse and worse. And in a time of coronavirus, as you saw just last week, there was a survey done about people's trust in the president as the messenger of news about coronavirus. Republicans, high degree of trust in the president and what he has said about coronavirus. For the Democrats, complete opposite, did not trust him. For the Republicans, lower level of trust for the CDC. For the Democrats, much higher level of trust for the CDC. For Democrats, if you're a Democratic governor, they believe what that person said. For the Republicans, if you're a Republican governor, they believe what that person said, and not crisscrossing paths. So it became a coronavirus became another palette on which we're painting our biases. And that's dangerous because our political process was meant for disagreement. It was not meant for this level of tribalization, because now what is the end result of that? We're passing historically low levels of legislation. We had been before coronavirus. We had been before Trump. These gears of democracy are slowly grinding down, and we think maybe they will grind. Sounds dramatic. Will they grind to a halt? It's something that a lot of us are, I'll say, existentially concerned about. Can our democracy stay on the rails? When Ben Franklin was asked what type of government had we been given, he said a republic. Remember the next line, a republic, if you can keep it. And the if you can keep it part seems awfully fragile right now. Yeah. So for a lot of us looking at our politicians not getting along, not just not getting along, but calling each other the worst things, putting writers in legislation to make them unpalatable, never going to get passed, doing things that are considered really underhanded and nasty just to disrupt the other side, even if it doesn't advance their own side. We look at that and think, this is not how the system was meant to run at all. And we don't like it. And it seems so entrenched that what the heck are we going to do about it? And there's some problems that are so big, we feel like, oh my gosh, there's nothing we can do about it. An example I'll give for that is global climate change. You look at what's happening in the world and think, I'm just one person. What can I possibly do against a cement factory in Russia or against a coal plant in China? I'm one person. And yet we all want to be able to do something. So what do? You do the same as me, man. You probably recycle, right? Like, well, at least I'm doing my part. Or maybe I'll walk instead of drive my car. Like, we all do our parts, and then we feel like we're part of the solution. To use that analogy and thinking about polarization and thinking about how divided we are as a nation, I think we got to think about, well, what can I do to be part of the solution? And I think about your work at CommonAlly, and I think you're part of the solution. Well, you're not going to undo this level of polarization in our body politic, but by having these one conversation at a time with people who are not on the same ideological page, we're demonstrating that we can overcome. We can disagree without being disagreeable. We can disagree better. The point isn't to not disagree. Of course we should disagree. We need to disagree better. And I think that's what you are demonstrating. So good on you for your program. I'm a fan and I support it. I think everyone should be watching programs like this. And I also think it's, honestly, I think it's part of the solution to these big problems that seem insurmountable.
Thank you.
You just got to do it one step at a time, like you are.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about solutions too, because I don't want people to get trapped in that feeling of hopelessness. So I certainly want to talk about that. Before I do, there's a lot to unpack there, because you said some incredible things. And I do feel like, tying this back to the pandemic, I kind of feel like, you've dedicated your life to nonpartisanship and what that means and how to actually keep fighting for it in a world, like you said, that is increasingly polarized. And we find ourselves in this kind of toxic situation. So continuing to show people the importance of staying nonpartisan and to disagree better. I like how you put that. I think that's really important. But at what point, because I too worry about the democracy, and at what point do you realize whether we have one or not? I think I think about this often, and I've written about this too, of just, it feels like an autocracy right now. I feel like the rule of law is being, kind of laughed at. And I feel like the way that things have been structured with court packing and with the AG and what's happening to kind of tip that scale does not feel very democratic. And then you have the infighting, and then you have the messaging. And, when social media comes into that, it just helps you stay in your echo chamber. So all of that combined does not feel like a democracy, but I don't feel like we're going to get to a day where it's been announced that we are no longer a democracy. So how do we know that we've gone over that line? I know that's a weighted question.
But. No, it's a completely, I think, completely fair, valid, interesting question for a lot of reasons. So one is that the line is not in the same place for everybody. So where is the democracy begin and the autocracy began, I think is not 100% subjective, but it is to some degree subjective. But think about it this way: wherever you draw the line, we have our own peculiar form of democracy in the United States. It is our own flavor of it. It always has been. It's always going to feel a little bit different. And nobody's form of democracy is ever going to fit the textbook version. And so we've always been an outlier in that sense. So the American form of democracy, and what does that look like? Well, it's representational. It's a republic. It's the state-based system. Those things are still intact. There's a federal government, there's state governments, there's municipal governments that are still largely nonpartisan. We have the checks and balances system within the federal government. Like, there's certain elements to this that are still very, very much intact. They may be eroded, they may be under siege. They have been at different parts in our nation's history. Will things get better before they get worse? I really don't know. I am a bit cynical on that point. I do think ultimately, if we're going to get through this and get on the better end of our, I'll say this: if we want the better angels to prevail over our demons, it's going to take some work, and I think a lot of that is going to have to take place at the K-12 educational levels, focusing on things like critical thinking, media literacy, helping us all become better consumers of information. It's awfully hard to be a citizen in the world today, particularly in democracy. The system depends on us to be informed voters. Okay, so pick an issue. How are you going to figure out all the facts and information about that issue? It's going to take weeks. You're going to have to understand sources. You're going to have to know how to sift bias from that. It's complicated, right? And it's a big burden. It didn't used to be that way. There's 3 media channels. You watch one of the 3, they're pretty good. You'll get a good sense of where things are. Now, there's 30,000. Good luck putting together your own word salad of ideas. And going through the process is like going through the minefields, because we're navigating the search engine algorithms, which are designed to reinforce our prior searches, our own preferences. Going to social media, same thing. We're seeing feeds and things repeat back to us what we already think, and show us less of the stuff that we find distasteful or don't want to see. And so we end up more in our echo chambers, deeper in those echo chambers, as you know this so well. And I think that's what makes it awfully difficult to be a citizen in the world today. And yet that's our responsibility. We got to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And that's part of our mission, why we started this whole thing at CommonAlly too, is not just like, one part is civic education, which I think has been stripped out of schools. So I think making sure that we refocus that is highly important. So then you actually have a knowledge base to kind of navigate that media surge. Because I do think that's an issue, that we have so many choices and it's so hard to figure out what's up and what's down. And I think that makes people throw their hands up, especially younger people, which I certainly want to get to. But I think, if there's positives that have come out of the pandemic, right, in 2 ways. You were talking about the environment, right, and everyone can kind of do their part.
Yeah.
LA has the cleanest air, the 3rd cleanest air in the world right now, next to Salt Lake in Japan. That's pretty insane. In the Himalayas in India, you can finally see them. In the last 30 years, you haven't been able to in the way you can now. And I don't know how long lasting that is. We're going to be talking with John Parfrey this week from Climate Resolve, and I'm really curious to see what he has to say about that, and whether this is, wishful thinking or if these things are really happening. But to me anyways, because I'm hyper aware of that stuff, is we took a breath for about a month, right? We let the earth pause and look what it's done, and things are coming back, and we have clean air. And so I do think that it's not just our individual impact, but it's also rallying the community, finding those common allies, and realizing, well, if we do this together in mass, same thing with voting, right? If we do this, we have a bigger impact. So I hope we come out of this and see multiple ways where we can use that as an example. And this is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about too, is the nonpartisan thing. I've never felt a bigger sense of community than I have in isolation. Being in quarantine, I mean, look, we had happy hour the other night, right? We probably wouldn't have done that. Life's busy. There's all this stuff going on. I see my neighbors more than I ever did. It's more genuine. Not that it never was, but those conversations feel so much more meaningful now, that I think to an extent, the fabric of who we are as a nation is kind of getting back together. Now, whether that's temporary or whether that's something that kind of goes outside of this bubble that we are living in, I don't know. But if we could find some sort of silver lining in this, I think it might be there in the way that we realize we're not all in this together, because I think we experience this differently. But I think we are realizing we are tied to one another, and we need to figure out how to do that better.
Yeah. You said that so beautifully. There is silver linings in this. There's silver linings in our days before this, when we were stressed and sitting in traffic and thinking about the next paycheck, and I just can't get ahead, and now my rent's due, and now I got to rush home to get my kid to this event. And there were silver linings in that world too. But you're right. The silver linings in our world now are very different. We're thinking about, oh, my neighbor left flowers on my doorstep today. That really happened. She's 90-something years old. She never leaves her house. But now there's nobody around. She's bored. She had flowers, brought them over. That's awesome. Wonderful. And so what do? We call her. I've never called my neighbor before, ever. Next door. I've visited her, but I've never called her. So I called her. Thank you, Jane. It was so nice. Those are the kinds of things I think you're talking about, those kinds of connections. Walking around the neighborhood, seeing inspirational messages written on chalk on the sidewalks, and thinking, you know what, the people are feeling the same thing I'm feeling. We feel connected in a way that we didn't before. Certainly there's something to that. Is coronavirus going to bring out the best of our humanity because we have had this shared experience? I don't think so. I'm maybe more jaded about the world than that, but I do see that there's some beautiful elements to this, and there's some beautiful connectivity that we see. I am a board member in an organization called the National Conversation Project. Right now we're doing a series called Weaving Community. If you Twitter the phrase #WeavingCommunity, you will see dozens and dozens of examples of stories just like the one you and I are talking about, where people are shedding their political differences, or politics is not even the subject of conversation, and are just showing how we have more in common as human beings than we don't, and celebrating that. And so there's definitely something beautiful to it. I hope that spirit lasts a while longer. But we're living in a time today where we do have the benefit of doing it, and I think if we need to be grateful for those kinds of moments, and clearly you are, and I feel like I am too. I take advantage of what bad hand we've been dealt right now, and make the best of it. That's all we can do, is make the best of it. So I'm with you, man. I'm here to try to think optimistically, but ultimately, I'm not under what I'd say is the illusion that this is going to last for years and years beyond.
Yeah, nor am I. And I think what's the Conversation Project again? I want to make sure that's
it's the National Conversation Project.
Okay. Wrapping this around conversation, I think, in just nonpartisanship in general, to be nonpartisan, I feel like you have to start with dialogue. Even the smallest kernel of an agreement can lead to better conversations afterwards. Like I fully believe that. So hats off to being on that board and to being on that project, because I think that really is the way, because it takes you out of that tribalism feeling. Like when you're in a group, you feel like you have to band to that group, and even parties to an extent, right? Like this is why we don't focus on parties with CommonAlly. It's because when you strip that out and you see, how has this person voted on the issues I care about? What do they really think about the things I care about? That tribalism goes away, the party goes away, and now is this person going to stand with me and for me? So I think that same thing goes into everyday conversations. So I think that's a really a smart way to not just approach this like in a singular way, but just to go about our lives, I think.
100%. I'll tell you, in the field of psychology, there's a fancy word called superordination. And what that means is when we normally relate to one another and say like, oh, look, we are both Los Angelinos and we live here. So if you're not from LA, you suck. We don't care about you. And if people are of that mindset, Dodgers, Angels, or forget the Yankees, people get into that mindset until you think, hey, you know what? We all like baseball. And like, oh yeah, now we have that in common. Now we have that in common with people all over the country. And then what if the baseball people think, oh no, we don't like the football people or the soccer people. Those are not real sports. And then you could think about it this way. Hey, you know what? We all love athletic competition. Yeah, you're right. We do all love athletic competition. Yeah, that's what bonds us. And now suddenly we keep going up and up and up. What coronavirus has done, has forced us to superordinate because now instead of being, we are people who live on this block or belong to this political party. Now it is, we're all people in this state, in this country, in this world, and we're all being affected by this thing. That thing is the outsider. That's the thing we can all not like. And all of us now are bonding because of our not being part of that. And I think that is a unique thing that has not happened yet in this world, but it allows us to superordinate and find a common humanity. So to your point, I hope that superordination feeling lasts forever, because it's frankly exceptionally useful for combating tribalism. And that's why I'm a big believer in perpetuating these kinds of stories. There may be little stories, but there are version of recycling to say, this is how we have overcome. This is how we are connecting.
That feels like the first positive reference I've ever heard to that, because I feel like, there's tropes with immigration and everything in a negative way of that, of just like, they're other, shut them out, that's not us. But now that coronavirus is the other and we're all on the other side, it's a really interesting concept to think about that in a very positive light, which again, I'm trying to find all of those pieces. I want to help people understand that there is positivity somewhere in here. I want to talk a little bit about your role at USC and how this is affecting students from different levels, right? I think I have a 5-year-old and I am now a teacher. Apparently, that's my new role as one of my other hats I need to wear. And we're experiencing this firsthand of just the change of how a student learns. So I'm interested to see what that's doing from an educational standpoint on the collegiate level. And then also, how is this affecting them mentally? How is this affecting them with their political involvement? Because obviously that's your role as well. So can you speak about that?
Thanks for the question. So, a lot of people in this world are hurting. They either have loved ones who are sick and ill and are dying or dead, and my heart goes out to all of them. Those are definitely the folks who are in the forefront of our thoughts right now. A lot of our students are in similar situations. USC has one of the largest international student populations of any university in the United States. So a lot of people who have ties to folks all over the world are really feeling this pandemic in a way that other universities may not be feeling as much. For our campus, in mid-March, we ended up switching to a completely digital learning environment. The libraries completely virtual, classrooms completely virtual, Zoom became used. Students who can adapt to technology much faster than some 70-year-old professors. So professors had a hard time with it, but ultimately everybody got with the program, and all learning is now Zoom-based or video conferencing based. That was a big transition, because how do you interact? How do you foster group discussion when you have to just single out one person at a time? Now you talk, and it's just becomes a form of moderation versus a group dynamic type of exchange. But we navigate those things and figure it out and do our best. It's not quite the same, but it also has value, and maybe even it has new value because we have to listen a little bit more. Now, instead of waiting for your turn to talk, you are listening to what the other person says so that you can then respond to it. It teaches a very different thinking process, I think, much like a lot of the German language has its verb at the end of the sentence. You don't know what their point is until you get to the end.
You gotta wait.
In a lot of ways, as Zoom classes are similar. You gotta wait. So that's a big adjustment for sure. Plus the dynamism of being in a classroom with your peers and friends. It can be a little lonely, it can be a little isolating for people who are extroverted, like my wife and like my son. It's particularly painful. Like, gosh, I miss my friends. I want to interact with other people. This is the worst. And part of the experience of college is just that. It's the friendships that you make. There was a survey done of 10,000 UCLA students 10 years after they graduated, and they asked, what was the number one most important skill you learned in college? And it was not what they learned in their major. That was around number 4 or 5. Number 1 was interpersonal skills. So friendships. And right now those friendships are being impacted because they have to do them virtually, digitally, telephonically, but they can't do it in person, and it's just not the same. So is the quality of education suffering? I'd say, of course it is. It's not just at USC, it's at every learning institution across the country. The flip side of that is now my kid is learning stuff on YouTube, on Khan Academy, and using different kinds of modalities to increase education. I'm having these personal lessons with him on this is how you do yard work, or this is how, this is how you play basketball,
change your
different
oil,
kinds
kid.
of lessons.
Yeah.
Right. These kinds of things. And parents around the country are doing that, right? So it's forced these different kinds of learning modalities. So at USC, the students are affected in all the ways that I described. But for our center in particular, we would have 3 events a week. We'd have politics and pizza, where students could come and interact with, famous political operatives, former elected officials. Now they can't. And yeah, you can see them online, but you can see them on a screen any day of the week because they're always on a screen, right? And so now you don't get to sit across from them and talk over pizza. So that feels very different. Even our digital events, I'll say the attendance and participation in those has gone way up. For us, typically a digital event would draw maybe 100 participants live, maybe another several hundred who would watch it after the fact. Our last digital event had over 1,100 signups, over 600 participants, and the video for it is already well into the thousands of views. There's a greater hunger for something interesting that's not coronavirus related right now, and I think that's an indicator of it. So our students are benefiting from that. I'll say there's a lot more intentionality, a lot more production that goes to these virtual events than there had been before, and that's a plus. But I do feel bad. I feel bad for the students, not just for this experience now. I feel especially bad for the students who are graduating and wondering, how the heck am I going to find a job in this environment? How do I interview? Nobody's hiring. Internships are frozen. The future does not look bright for me. But we're going to be feeling the impacts of this coronavirus, obviously, for quite a long time to come, even if they were to lift all restrictions right now. So I feel bad for those students, and for those students in particular, we're helping them disproportionately. We want them to find meaningful work. We want them to apply their skills. We want them to live their best lives. And for us, that just means more work with the campaigns that you talked about earlier in the program, with the government offices, and with the non-governmental organizations, so that we can find interesting ways to employ these students, keep their skills fresh, and make the most out of their really valuable and expensive USC education.
Yes, there's that. That's really interesting. Yeah, that makes you think about it through a different lens for sure. And that brings up a good point too. I think the possibility of, okay, well, maybe I can't get out and get my dream job, but I'm really interested in politics and they need extra help right now. So maybe there is like a way in and to find, a more creative path around that. But that's good to see that the involvement and the attendance on the politics and pizza has gone up. That's great. It's a great event. So do you see differences between the way some students experience this than others? Like if there's somebody who, doesn't have access to internet or doesn't have, a computer at home or wherever they have to go back in quarantine too, if that setup isn't as good as it was for them on campus, are you seeing that, or is everybody kind of on a level playing field, and is there steps being taken to help mitigate that?
They are not on a level playing field. I'm so glad you asked that question, because we had always had a sort of digital inequity. We call it the digital divide. It has existed through K-12 schools across this country, and it is no exception once students get into college. And we saw a study that came out last year that talked about how 1 out of 5 students in the California community college system were what they called not housing shortage, but basically they either lived in their cars or they didn't have homes. 1 out of 5 in the state of California. So there's definitely something to digital inequity. So for those students, the University of Southern California has provided a few things. One is they provided a stipend for its employees who do not have fancy computers at home and now need to purchase additional Wi-Fi capacity, buy a different router, basically set up a home office like a lot of us have to do now. There's a stipend in everybody's paycheck to allow them to do that. That's amazing. The university has also made hundreds of laptops available to students, faculty, and staff on a rental basis. I mean, they don't charge you for it. It's free rental basis, and they will have it delivered to your home so that you can set it up and have laptop access, computer access in your home if you don't otherwise have it. So they're closing the gap for sure. And to the university's credit, they've gone to great lengths to make sure that the learning process is minimally disrupted. I don't know how other universities are handling it. I can say that I'm exceptionally impressed with USC and how it is handling it.
Good.
I'm not just saying that because it's my current employer. Listen, I went to UCLA. USC had been my rival for years. It's just genuine respect for the school because of how hard they're trying to make sure that people don't suffer unnecessarily if they have the funds and the means to help bridge that gap.
Good. That's great to hear. Yeah, I always wonder about that. And I know, there's a lot of inequities out there. So it's good to know that there's something being done. I want to talk, I know we're brushing up on time here, but I really would like to talk about, I wanted to take a deep dive into politics and just what that means before and after this, but we could save that for another time. I want to talk a little bit about your work at ProCon and what you do at the Center for the Political Future, and kind of talk about what those two things are. Again, like I know I've said this before, but I feel like I've never met anyone who's dedicated so much of their life to what it means to be nonpartisan and why it's important to be objective and to kind of shout from the rooftop about what that is and to be open to other sides. I think it's incredibly valuable, and unfortunately, it's like a chupacabra in the times we live in. But I just want to give you kind of a platform to talk about both because I'm super interested in it, and I'm sure other people are as well.
No, well, thank you for the platform and for the very kind words, man. Much appreciated. You're right that it's something I'm very passionate about because, well, let me say it this way. We all need this. I came to the United States at age 1 from the country of Iran. In the country of Iran, where many of my relatives still live, we don't have certain basic freedoms that we do in this country. I certainly don't take those freedoms for granted. I feel like I need to support and lean into the democratic institutions that make the United States still a beacon for the world about what freedom means. This country is still a magnet for oppressed people all over the world who are fleeing to the freedoms that this country provides. So when I think about that, and I think about the threats to the democratic institutions here, I think about things like hyperpartisanship and how it's slowly grinding things to a halt, and it is harming our civic institutions, and we're doing it to ourselves. When I think about misinformation, disinformation, I think, shame on the people who are saying wrong things, factually incorrect things, the people who are perpetrating fake news. Yeah. Shame on them. They need to stop that. The bots that are doing this, the other countries who are trying to maliciously influence our thinking, shame on them. I also think, shame on us. I forward stuff that's not true on accident, and I'm an expert, I'm a professional, and I still do it. It is awfully hard sometimes to be able to tell what's true from what's not. And yet, shame on us. We have to become better consumers of information. So to that end, and to your kindly offering me the platform, procon.org is a website that was designed to make it very, very easy for people to find out what they think on complicated issues. Issues like death penalty, immigration, whether felons should be allowed to vote, recreational marijuana, should we have more of it, less of it, corporal punishment, animal experimentation, school uniforms, on and on and on, dozens and dozens of topics. Provides the best research for and against these topics, and then you read both sides. We don't read one side and then the other side. Both sides are right there side by side. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that if I come into the website and I think I am strongly pro-death penalty, and I feel hurt because my side is very well positioned there, they will say my side of the debate much better than I could.
Hmm. Gotcha.
Much better source, better information, better arguments. And I feel like, wow, they really got my side. But then staring at me in the face, right on the other side, is the complete opposite viewpoint. And it is also said really, really well with top sources and great statistics and facts and information. And then what that forces me as the reader to do is think, oh my gosh, I thought I was wildly over here, but now, maybe this other side, they made a good point. And for those of us who live in echo chambers, which is all of us, we often don't get that very rational, compelling perspective that is opposite our own. We'll get some ridiculous version of it where someone makes an idiot comment on the other side and we can dismiss it easily and go, that's an idiot thing to say. But if somebody has a really, really good point and you're forced to reckon with it, because one, I already feel heard. Over here. Now I'm open to other perspectives. Yeah. And now this other perspective has got me thinking, maybe I don't have it right, or maybe they have something right. And it sort of builds a respect for the opposing view. That, in a nutshell, is what ProCon was designed to do and what it has done for about 20 to 25 million people a year, about 250 or so million people since it started. I'm very proud of the work that organization has done. We worked with over 13,000 schools in all 50 states, 94 countries. The site was translatable into over 100 different languages. We won all kind of major awards. And I loved that it was able to help people in a very practical way where they think, my mother has glaucoma and I hear she should use marijuana. Should she? Well, we've asked all the major ophthalmological organizations, all the major glaucoma research organizations, and presented their best research side by side. You talk to your doctor, you read the pros and the cons, you decide for yourself. Make that your business. We made it easy for you to make it your business. Don't have a stake in this one way or the other. Yeah. You make the best decision for yourself. So that was ProCon. I left that job after 15 years in order to be able to do, well, one, not make nonprofit wages. That was important. But two, to be able to carry on this work in a different way where instead of speaking to a digital audience like I was at ProCon, this was communicating via website, I wanted to be able to communicate to people directly. And that's what I can do now at USC. I am very privileged to be able to work with some of the top practitioners in the world. Bob Shrum and Mike Murphy are my bosses. Both of these people together have worked on over a dozen presidential campaigns, countless Senate and congressional campaigns, run elections for foreign leaders, wildly accomplished people that most of us look at on television and think, boy, are they smart, and now I get to see them every day. So I think that's a huge plus. The caliber of the students who attend USC, very, very impressive. I feel like I can make a deeper impact in people's lives by sharing the knowledge that I have and bringing top people to the university so we can do in person what ProCon was doing digitally. And so we can carry that type of thinking, exposure to contrary points of view, always being respectful of opposing ideas, trying to superordinate whenever we can, right? Always see what we have in common versus what divides us, and apply that type of critical thinking into all of the programs that we do. We teach listening above all, and I think that is what excites me about being at this university. It's also allowed me to pursue some other side interests. I now serve on probably 5 different boards. I'm a mentor to students at UCLA and at USC. I'm all about bridging divides, right? And allowed me to pursue some other entrepreneurial interests because, hey, we've all got a little side hustle too, right? So I'm working it, man. But it has been my passion. If you Google my name, you'll see talks and speeches that I've given, articles that I've written, a book that I'm working on, all around polarization, how we got this way, how bad is it, but perhaps most importantly, what can we do about it? And it teaches people the various recycling tactics, right, for what we can do in our own lives and say, like, look, I'm not just going to be scared of this problem or lament it. I can actually do something about it. And it's something, it feels good. It feels good to do it. And it allows us to connect with people in ways that we just didn't think was possible until you learn certain skills and tactics. And you'll find out that the thing we were taught, never talk about religion and politics, we'll find that it's actually very enjoyable to do so. And not only that, it is absolutely essential that we do so, because that's how this whole system of government is designed to work.
I agree. Well put, my friend. Well put. Well, I'd like to end with, you mentioned the book and your work in general in finding those solutions and not just talking about it. Can you discuss some of those solutions quickly about what people can do? Like, what is your advice there?
Yeah, so one of it is just how we behave when we consume information. So, for example, if you use, say, Facebook. On Facebook, we probably are listening to people who are very like-minded. That is natural. That's how the algorithm is designed. Purposefully, even if you don't like something that the opposing party has said, purposefully choose to like it or choose to follow it and force the algorithm to give you more of that stuff. Don't just do it once, do it a bunch of times. You'll get more and more exposure to viewpoints that you just didn't know were legit. And didn't even know existed. So when you do that, it will increase exposure. And I think increasing exposure to contrary points of view is very healthy. We may build up our own resistance to them. We may try to push back and double down on our own beliefs. But the point is that we are putting ourselves in a position to learn. And that is critical. So put yourself in a position to learn, force yourself to look at opposing viewpoints, force the algorithms to give you what you don't want, make yourself uncomfortable. It seems like contrary advice, but you got to do it on Facebook, got to do it on Twitter, got to do it in Instagram, and force the algorithms to get you what you know is in your best interest. If you're on a junk food diet all the time and you think, I better eat healthy, consider healthy differing points of view and force yourself to take the other points of view sometimes. So that's one way to do it. The other way is that beyond digitally is to put yourself in a situation where you can have a pleasant conversation with somebody else. Now, the key to that is listening. Now, I say all of this, and you will try different tactics. You will try your hardest to really give the other person the benefit of the doubt. Listen intensely to what they have to say. Be respectful as you can be. And the other person is still a flaming jerk. That's going to happen sometimes, and that's okay. Every conversation is not going to work out. But we'll often find that the person with whom we disagree about some random political issue, whether Nancy Pelosi should have been as aggressive or not non-aggressive about pursuing the impeachment process, if it's that, we may find out, who cares? I didn't realize that you're from the 2 towns away from where I grew up. How interesting is that? Yeah. Or, our birthdays are a week apart. Or, I didn't realize that, we went to the same gym and we do have the same kind of exercise. It could be any number of things that we find that we're suddenly bonding on because we realize that either our political differences aren't all that meaningful, right? It's not really my identity. It's not really how I structure my perception of myself. It is just a viewpoint. And viewpoints, like anything else, should be malleable. Give me some better facts and information. I'll hear you out. I'll listen. Maybe I'll adjust. Maybe I won't. Yeah. So to your question about the tactics, I think the tactic is force yourself to do digitally and in person that process of listening, forcing yourself to bring in additional points of view, put yourself in a position to learn. If you find that you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably in the wrong room. We want to keep making sure.
I have no fear of that.
Make sure you always get these opposing views. So that's it. And I'd say lastly is to be critical because assume that if you are reading something in an email forward, it is probably not true. And that if you're reading something on social media, maybe it's not true. Take it with a huge grain of salt. If you heard it from your neighbor, it's probably 50-50. It might not be true. The point is you have to be very skeptical of the news sources and trust in certain authority. Now, there's a reason that people are experts in certain things, and we shouldn't just dismiss expertise out of hand. So I think there's find out who is trustworthy based on authority and experience, and then maybe listen to them a little bit more, and not so much to the email forward that uses all caps and doesn't have a source.
That's perfect advice and beautifully wrapped up into a 3-point listicle. I love it. I want to thank you so much for your time. That
course.
Incredible conversation. And as always, this could probably go on for 5 hours. Whether people want to hear us for 5 hours is another thing. But
They do. They totally do.
Yeah, they probably do for you. I mean, you're the pro, but this is new for me. But yeah, I really want to just thank you for taking the time, and definitely to tell Bob and Mike to come on so we can have them both up there and we can see.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
Yeah. And maybe we'll put you in the middle as well, and I'll sneak away.
No, they're the real experts. Yeah, no, I appreciate the offer very much, and appreciate your time very much. Appreciate your show very much, and appreciate what you're doing so very much. You are part of the solution, man. Thank you so much for it.
Same.
And all the best with your role as parent teacher right now in the time of coronavirus. And I know we had a virtual happy hour, but maybe the next one will be in person.
I would love that. I'm really looking forward to that. Awesome. Thank
you.
You
too, man. Good talking to you.
You too, buddy.